Just in time to blow my nose. So this this morning's Dharma talk titled Shila, Samadhi and Prajna. Sanskrit anyway. Shila, Samadhi and Prajna. It's a traditional teaching of Buddhism. I've talked about it before. I'm going to talk about it again. I usually don't say anything twice, unless I do. The way I talk about this would probably be quite a bit different than the way it would be talked about in ancient times when it first arose as a teaching of the Buddha. So Shila is sometimes called morality, sometimes discipline. Samadhi is not to, or sometimes talked about as meditation. And prajna is seeing deeply into the nature of something, and sometimes is a translation of that word would be wisdom. Or simplifying, I would say, Shila, sit down, Samadhi, observe, and Prajna, or see what it is. See what it actually is, rather than see your ideas about it. Quite often we're looking at something and our presumptions, our preconceptions are so intense and so fear-based that even if we're told, you could see into this more deeply, or this may not be what you think it is. We'd rather hang on to, grasp, or fixate on our ideas about it because we feel safer. The ego mind, the self-centered mind, the mind which manifests as an individual being that needs protection, needs advancement, or needs something, or whose life is always based on something else. This isn't good enough. Need something else. So initially, when we come into this kind of a teaching, we start to hear that right away. So train your mind, find out what this is. Train your, it's sometimes called the two wings of the bird, the using the intellectual approach, the conceptual approach, and using the intuitive approach, or the strengthening the awareness part of the consciousness. There's a thinking part, which is usually muscle bound, because anytime anything happens, we immediately think about it. Is it good, is it bad? Should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? What are they doing? Should they do that? Shouldn't they do that? Why are they doing that? It just goes on and on like that. Sometimes if you have had no mind training at all, you don't know about anything other than that circle. Those constant circles are going around. I like it. I don't like it. It's good. It's bad. We're getting somewhere. We're starting to make some progress. In this path, progress is a misunderstanding. The word progress isn't even used a little bit. It's used if people really need that, then we can come up with some ideas about progress. But to focus on and over their feeling, over their idea or a goal orientation, has a little bit of help or support to it, but the ego mind, the self-centered mind, tends to emphasize that, and the merchandising mind tends to sell it to themselves and to others if they can get in their foot in the door. Sales. That's why I had that out, because I knew I was about to be threatened. My blood sugar just went over 200, probably because I'm so excited to be here. So would you like to take charge of that? I don't think it'll do it anymore. So these, the Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna are meant to be contemplated, and not each person's going to understand that a little bit different than someone else. Using that or understanding that might not match up with some kind of traditional way of working with it. So again, discipline or have some kind of a structure. And if we did go into the ethical part of it or the morality part of it, my feeling about that is a lot different I'm sure, than the morality that was taught 1,000 years ago, where cultures were different, society was different. They did not have the internet, as we all know, and the communication situation, education levels, and all that are so different. Our culture is so diverse. And here we have people, all these people in ancient times of general population did not do this. They might have gone to the temple, whatever the tradition, and made offerings or so on, but they didn't actually practice. You're actually doing today by meditating what monastics did in ancient times. So it's a different situation. The ethical part needs to come out of the awareness and not out of following rules. Even in the ancient traditions, I can't remember which sutra it is. It's either Hokkyo-zanmai or Sandakai says, don't set up standards. Is it Hokkyo-zanmai? Sandakai. Yeah. So in Sandakai translates as the equality of sameness and difference, which is just read the title. You don't have to read the sutra. Anything that's the same is equal to anything that's different. It's called non-dual, advaita, non-duality. Everywhere it looks like there's two things, you're wrong. You're not relatively wrong, or relatively you're completely correct. But ultimately, you're wrong. And if you grasp that, you've just left the spiritual path. If in fact you can do that. I don't know if you can leave it, but you can have a much different spiritual path than someone who is endeavoring to see what is true, rather than someone who is trying to conclude something. So if you're working with your mind, you're training your mind, you're allowing, when I say allow, you're not interfering with your mind, you're allowing the negativity. You sit down, hold still, and the first 10 minutes are fine, and then you have 20 minutes where you're starting to deal with or be maybe haunted by feelings that were coming out of 4 weeks ago, 4 years ago, 40 years ago, or maybe another lifetime possibly. Some other kind of negativity is arising. Please, just let that come in the door. Be a good host. Just whatever. If you're sitting and holding still, whatever's happening in your mind stream is totally appropriate. Don't miss your life. Don't object to your karma. Don't agree with your karma. Agreeing with your karma actually gets in the way. Don't promote positivity or negativity on the cushion. I'm not saying you might not work with it a little bit differently in your everyday life, because then you're not only dealing with the causes and conditions that are coming out of your own substrate, your own deep consciousness, your own alaya vijnana or storehouse consciousness, but you're also dealing with all the other things that are coming, going, other people, what they're saying, what they think, what you're thinking about, what they're thinking about, what you're thinking, what you're thinking about, what they're thinking about, what you're thinking about, what they're thinking. You know what I'm saying? We don't really, wouldn't really describe it that way, but if you go and look at your conversation, we really do a lot of that. Sometimes it's really fun, and sometimes it really sucks. This is pretty good coffee. Who's in there? So the idea with going back to the idea of ethics, if you're training your mind to be more clear when what we call post meditation, you've been meditating maybe for an hour, maybe 2 hours, maybe you've just finished a retreat and you come out of that and maybe you're not feeling so good. Maybe some of the negativity you were going through has caused difficulty for you, and you're just kind of tired of having negative feelings. Still, and then whatever's coming towards you in terms of the environment, in terms of people in the environment, because you've been training your mind, because you have been generous, in other words, giving everything your attention and not dividing things up, just letting your mind flow without interruption, just observing, kind of like watching clouds. Beautiful, but none of your business. You can't tell clouds what to do. You really can't tell your thoughts what to do. If you think, you can do that, then you're wrong. You might have to find that yourself. I'm just pointing it out, and you could come back later and say, I was able to change my thoughts. No longer think anymore. And say, well, good luck. That won't last. Nothing lasts. Anything you can conclude is going to, it could exclude, or it could explode. If you conclude it too tight, it will explode. And why? Because anytime you put energy this way, then the energy has to go the other way. It's just the nature of relative truth. So less is better. Unless it's meditation, in which case more is better at this point. So if the spaciousness that you've been not interfering with in your mind as you're meditating over and over, day after day after day, eventually you won't know it because you can't find that. You cannot find awareness. You won't know if there's an open dimension in your mind, as long as there's a self-centeredness that is looking for it. As long as there's an ego that's looking for what? Something else. I'm doing so good. Or something else. I'm doing so bad. Or all the nuance in between. So get up off the cushion, go into your world, your life, your candy store, your garage, your family supper, whatever may happen, and just receive. Just receive. And if you do that and you're clear about that and you're not operating out of a bunch of standards or ideas or things you have to live up to, I'm not saying those couldn't be helpful, but when you clamp down on rules and laws and rights and wrongs, then you miss the fundamental nature of our life. You actually miss your life. You settle for a obstructed, safe, secure, controlled situation where nothing's going to go wrong, instead of living in an open dimension where you are being with whatever arises. Just a way of talking about it. If you're in that kind of an openness, then the ethical part becomes obvious to you. You don't have to follow a rule. There are sometimes you might move in somebody's direction and push on them. And there's other times where it could be a very similar situation where you don't push at all, but you don't come to conclusions about right and wrong. And I need to push on them, or I need to tell them off. And that's threatening to ego, because ego wants to control everything. And it will tell you, the propaganda of ego is, you need me. Because what if you did something wrong? What if you did something that everybody thought was terrible and you got bad press? I was very lucky to have a teacher that really didn't care about the press. And of course, he got a lot of bad press. He's still getting bad press. He's been dead for many years. All I know is if I hadn't met him, I would not be here, because I did not want this person to live. I'm not exaggerating. Would have been hard to keep living. So Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Shila is the morality, or is discipline, or some kind of a structure, some kind of an understanding of what is occurring. And that can show up just as simply as a practitioner, as a meditator, as setting up a time to meditate. I'm gonna take out of my 24 hours, I'm gonna take an hour, not much. I'm gonna take an hour, sit down, hold still, and not do anything. But just watch what continues to do stuff. Watch what moves. And the mind, the conditioned mind, will continue to cough up stuff. And you might be sitting, and you might have a half an hour where not much happens. You might have the next half an hour, you might have all kinds of crazy stuff appearing and looking for approval or disapproval or ignorance, passion, aggression, and ignorance. So I'm fine with not interrupting anything. If you have questions, I can continue to talk, and I can also answer questions if you have about this or anything else. Theo?
You mentioned how this is a goalless path. I'm curious, how is seeing what moves not a goal?
Because I said it was. Well, it's not that it's goalless. It's just that the goal, kind of stretching it out into some kind of future. It's just a very simple, immediate. It has more to do with intention So you can't really see what moves, but you can endeavor. You can sit down, hold still, hold everything still that you can without being aggressive. Hold still, and then intend to see what moves. And then what the awareness part does is see how impossible that is to do. It's just one failure after another. If there's a lot of success happening there, you're probably not seeing what's moving. You're concluding you actually have a slight lamination coming up over what's moving onto a success story about what's moving. It's a very, very subtle area of the mind. And it literally, I'm not saying there isn't somebody in here who's already the Buddha. Of course there is. The Buddha's always showing up to be critical of me. Go ahead.
So, you say, see what this is. And, don't see your preconceptions.
No, you see them. You don't have to get rid of anything. If you see the preconception, you can also see right through it. You can see that what the preconception is covering up. Go ahead.
Well, I thought I was doing that. And then
if you think you're doing that, you're not.
And then, well, now I'm seeing that what this is infused with my preconceptions. And so how can you see what something is when it's rice pudding?
Persist.
And what happens with persistence?
I'm going to tell you everything. What happens with that is just a feeling of not knowing, which is very hard to get a credential out of not knowing. Very hard to get a credential because not knowing feels to the ego mind, a self-centered mind, which is hard to find because it just seems so solid and real. It's me. I don't look for myself. I know who I am. But when you have that kind of falling over feeling of not knowing, then that's called space. And when you actually begin to see that is the self, then we're calling it emptiness or anatta, emptiness of self. There's no self. I'm not saying there isn't something there, but it's not an individual being. It's a discontinuous identity that comes and goes. If you go and make some rice pudding, it's the identity of somebody who's making rice pudding. If you eat the rice pudding, then it's the person eating the rice pudding. It's happening all the time. It's very simple, very direct, and it's obvious all the time. But we cover it up out of fear. We cover it up out of hope. We cover it out of presumptions, ideas, judgments, on just a layer after layer of just like it's like a plywood factory, generating concepts that we prevent ourselves from seeing the completely naked situation which we have been downloaded into this body-mind complex called a living being. You are not even a human, fundamentally. Humans are just a temporary Halloween costume. I mean, it's temporary. It might last 70 years or more. It's temporary. And yet we see when we're here, we know we're going to die intellectually, but we don't really feel it. That happens to other people. And oh yeah, I'm sure I know it's going to happen eventually, but I'll face that. What is that bridge? Yeah, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Good luck. Good idea to face it right now. Yes, Wendy.
What about when one is sitting and the time passes and you hear the bell and you don't recall anything that happened? Like feeling spaced out. Kind of like when you're going on autopilot when you're driving.
Okay, I'm gonna have a one-word response to it, but I can also work further if you have further elaboration. That's awareness. That's awareness. It's not a thought process. Some thought process, but basically you concluded something. That was the thought process. You concluded that you were spaced out, but there wasn't much of elaboration there, other than that's a fairly loaded concept. Because it's a little critical, like it's something you shouldn't be. Am I correct in what you're saying?
Yes, but that conclusion doesn't come until you get snapped out of it by the sound of the bell or the water.
So just continue. How long have you been meditating? Yeah, not very long. But just nothing lasts. Any conclusion about meditation, any state you come into will not last. It doesn't have duration. The whole idea of duration is a misunderstanding that eventually starts to change. And ego, self-centered mind, that's when you notice what your ego is, when it starts to get worried about something. So yeah, I call that awareness. And that's something that every meditator sooner or later goes. Some people, depending on your particular style of confusion, your particular style of trying to be somebody, your particular style of trying to avoid reality, just put it bluntly, will show up differently. Some people don't experience that until they've been doing it for years. Some people experience it right away. It doesn't mean it's better or worse. It just means that the way in which a person's mind is functioning, they'll run into that kind of thing at different levels. It's Trungpa Rinpoche, my first teacher, had a series of his talks. It was compiled, and talks are interesting, but I was like book titles. And the book title for this was Journey Without Goal. It's like, could you paraphrase that and say, a journey where you don't know where you're going? You could. It's kind of spaced out. So the spaced out part is just first thought, best thought. I seem spaced out. No problem. Just come back and sit. When it's time to sit again, come back and notice that it won't be the same. Or it might be slightly the same, but then it's just slightly gray in that area. Or you weren't quite as spacious. There's a lot of space there, but there was something happening there that you don't know exactly what it was. It's endless. It's like sitting in the front row and watching a stage, and just one being with a costume comes after another. And it's like a constant review of actors on the stage. More? That's enough. Isan.
In what way is seeing the truth not a conclusion?
To see the truth is a way of talking about it, but if you actually see the truth, then nothing really occurs. Nothing's concluded. To conclude something, you have to have other things coming together to conclude something, and that stops happening. So then there's still conclusions coming and going, but there's no concluder, and there's fundamentally no conclusion. It's still you just if you're still embodied in a human form, you just see everything as an illusion all the time, and you can't brag about it. You can't say, "I see everything as illusion." How about you guys? So you can't really get sometimes it's called Buddha Dharma without credentials. You can't really get a credential. You can't get made it. After all this work, I meditated for 300 years, and finally, it's like there's no guarantee. That's one of the first things I heard out of my teacher's mouth was no guarantee. I thought, I don't know what I thought, but I was kind of perplexed by that. I liked hearing that, but I thought, well, why would we do this if we don't get some kind of a reward? More?
I was wondering if seeing the truth is also emptiness.
Yeah, we're starting to move into an area where there's a lot of concepts to kind of cover the explain, or so we're not left with too much open space. But open space is also relative. So there's both space and no space. It's like there's no depth in anything. That vanishes. But yet there's endless. I mean, one real strong relative example of it. I can, if you go out here and stand in the parking lot, look down. There's that stops right there. That's the extent of the space right there. And just all you have to do is look up. Nothing stops. But since we see it all the time, we just kind of take it for granted. But it's endless. Absolute truth is right here, not separate from this. And that's just a simple way of talking about it. Dale?
I'm sorry, you caught me before it formed.
Good. Jasmine?
Can you speak about the difference or similarity between awareness and consciousness.
Mhm. So different ways are similar words, different ways of talking about it. And the way I like to say, the consciousness is happening everywhere. Everything is consciousness. And a simple way of, just like your food's being digested without your control or permission, sometimes say, meant to be humorous, but if you were put in charge, totally in charge of all of your body completely, as awareness, you wouldn't be able to do it. You wouldn't be able to digest your food. You wouldn't know how to make sure you have enough of this nutrient or whatever in different parts of your organs and so on to make you probably die pretty quickly. If everything was just put on, taken off from automatic pilot, which would be consciousness, and put into awareness, which is just a specific awareness of this. Awareness seems to be more about things in terms of concepts or the sixth sense fields, including the mind. You're actually aware of the color blue. You're aware of, so awareness is a form of ignorance, because I'm aware of this computer, I'm ignoring everything else. So it's a very relative situation. So more?
You say consciousness is everywhere. Can you say more about what you mean by that?
Yes, it's nowhere else but everywhere. Darn
Settle
zen.
with this answer.
Very zen-y.
Very Buddhist.
Except it's not a cologne. It's not a perfume. Zen-y is not perfume. Did they name a perfume samsara or something like that? You see all these Sanskrit words coming up for products because they have that romantic sound to them. Laura.
Could you expand on your comments, Sokuzan, where you said, I believe you said ethical behavior comes out of awareness, not following rules.
Yes.
Given the fact that practice has a lot of guidelines for us to follow.
Yeah. So you need some structure, but the structure we have for practicing and so on is based on centuries and centuries of seeing that we really need some kind of grounding, some kind of a shape, some kind of an environment, some kind of a mandala, some kind of the other simple word is container. To sit down and hold still creates a container for the consciousness. If you move your arm just slightly, it's not that is going to stop your awareness from operating in terms of your thought patterns or emotions or feelings or memories. It's just that it anytime there's any movement, that's why walking meditation is fine. Go ahead and do it. But I don't even teach it. Even though I was taught, I did that for decades. I stopped doing it because I would rather see you sit down and hold still and look at the wall. If you need a break, go walk around, but make it that's why I teach it that way, so that it's trying to tell me stuff. What did I do wrong? So if you need to do something, I would rather see, if you have 15 people all sitting and facing the wall, traditionally is don't do anything until the timekeeper tells you to. I think that's a misunderstanding. It only took me 3 decades to see that, of doing that and saying, and I didn't come to a conclusion about it. I just stopped doing it. I don't remember thinking that. It's like after I stopped doing it, when I'm asked about it, then this is what shows up, is I think each person who, with their own body-mind complex, needs to decide when they need to walk and not have that imposed by some, that's overkill, over control. And so we need some kind of a form, but we don't need to overdo it. And sometimes it takes a long time to see how much to have the form. And then maybe we could eliminate this, just like when the Buddha, just before his parinirvana or his death, he said, those 250 rules for monks, do away with those. I think that's an indirect quote. And then he came back and said, well, let's keep some of them, but don't. But then he didn't tell anybody. I think that was deliberate. That's why the 18 different, right after he passed, boom, people are saying, well, I think he meant this. I think he meant that. And that's why Buddhism is still here, because of that spread of all those different ideas about what the Buddha was saying. So, and then like we have 16 precepts, which more about that, or did I cover I could say more, but if you want to take me further into that.
Yeah, just the fact that the precepts exist and they are guidelines for ethical behavior, and your comment that ethical behavior comes out of awareness, not following rules.
Mm-hmm.
So we have rules to follow,
We do.
but you're saying that awareness is the.
Okay, I'll say it this way. The three pure precepts, you familiar with those? Be good, don't do harm, do good, and save all beings. So, I mean, but how that shows up to each person, there needs to be enough openness there, because there's sometimes you need to just leave your neighbor alone and not do anything. And another time you need to go over there and take that stick away from them so they can't continue to beat whoever they're beating. So it's like, mind your own business, but not every time, not always so. Suzuki Roshi, the title of one of his books is Not Always So. This is why it's necessary for us to function. And you could even say, trust ourselves or give ourselves the benefit of the doubt that we're going to be able to work with our intelligence in such a way that we're not constantly following rules. The rules will get in the way of good behavior, and you actually would be breaking a precept by not going over and taking that stick away from that person. On the other hand, you could go the other way and say, well, it's dependently arisen, so it's just happening. I don't want to interfere with their karma. A bunch of other baloney that can come out of our self-centered mind about being right and not being wrong. So it might feel risky to function that way, but probably ethically it would be more appropriate. Most Buddhists that I've met misunderstand dependent origination, misunderstand the actual teaching of the Buddha. They still think there's a right and wrong, and that's a misunderstanding. And but I'm not here to argue about that particularly. You can take any position you want. More. So out of the space, though, because it's situational. What was it? Bonhoeffer, the philosopher, talked about situation ethics, and other philosophers did, where it was a situation that you see what is ethical to do, not some kind of rule that's going to fit everything. Life is just too complicated to do that. So do good. And what probably the best thing is to not do anything. If you don't do anything, then the need to actually walk into that situation is probably going to overpower your observing your preceptives. Do good, be with all things. I just need to be with the person beating their dog. Nah. At the same time, you don't step into a situation that you're projecting ideas onto that you're actually reacting to the idea. You need to see the situation clearly. How do you do that? You find out who this is. Find out who you are. It's frightening to look and see who you are, because the closer we get to who you are, the less we see. It's called emptiness. It's very difficult to see this without a teacher, without a teaching, without a practice or a form or a monastery or what's this place called? Sanctuary. Yeah. Without a sanctuary and without a form, without sit down, hold still, watch what moves. Well, maybe you can't. Maybe you have something else to do. That's not wrong. It's just you have something else to do. So don't be hard on yourself. Give yourself, if you can give yourself some understanding, then it's easier for you to extend that to others. But if you're shutting down on yourself and treating yourself disrespectfully in some way and justifying with some kind of dumb conclusions about things, and you're probably going to be not so easy to get along with. Further question?
You say that get to know yourself. And do we get to know ourselves whilst we're sitting, or do we get to know ourselves as a result of sitting?
A little of each. It's just like the image I used of the sharpening the knife. When you pull the knife away from the vegetables, sit down, sharpen the knife. It's kind of boring. You're sharpening the blade, sitting there, sharpening the blade of awareness by watching what moves without interfering, by watching. So that strengthens the insight aspect of the consciousness. So you're actually able to receive things fearlessly. It takes a long time. There's some people more than others, and nothing is concluded, but we begin to understand the fundamental nature of conclusions. This is the nature of conclusion, ignorance. And this is also the nature of exclusions. Don't do anything with it. If you're going to do anything, then include. how many clues are there? 3 clues: exclude, conclude, and include. Include works okay. Yeah, you can let the mice come into the house. No? About this in yourselves. Okay.
When I'm looking at what this is, I'm continuously coming to conclusions. So what is this when it's not a conclusion?
If you notice you're coming to conclusions, then that's beginning. That's awareness, where the awareness is more powerful or more clear than the form that is coming into that space we call awareness or consciousness. So when you see that you're doing that, don't interfere with that. It's like watching somebody. When you take care of children, your whole business is about childcare. To watch, you notice yourself in your situation where you're watching 2 children kind of disagreeing or arguing. So you're watching that happen, and there's a point where you need to step in, and you know what that point is. But it's not a rule you're following. You just kind of sense by watching. You watch when the disturbance on one end gets more and more intense. And these are 4-year-olds. There's a time when the conclusion concludes itself. You don't think your way, but you're just really clear about what's happening. I'm sure I'm describing something fairly close to what happens, because but that's something. That area is very simple and works okay. Much more difficult when you're dealing with adults or whole society or family situations, sangha situations. It's much more difficult. But you have a great. That's why you're there, to learn things. They're not there to learn. They're there to teach you. Tiny teachers, you've heard of that, right? I think I gave that talk one time. Yes.
But even a thought for me is a conclusion. To observe something and say, this is what I'm observing, it feels like a conclusion. So I'm just really confused on how to take this constantly moving stream and then see the stream in this thing that I've separated from it.
Stop trying to take it. Don't do anything with it. Just what your only job is awareness. Everything else needs to come out of the awareness as not an activity. You might see it, but you witness the activity when it's happening. You don't come up with a conclusion before and then decide to act. If you're deciding to do stuff, you're trapped. Not bad. It's just that you're actually trapped in the causes and conditions that arise as your karma without being aware of them. So when you're aware of them, then you're able to see. So it's called discriminating awareness wisdom. You're able to see the areas where you need to get on board the bus. There's some buses pull into the station, you get on. Other buses you pull in, you don't get on, and you don't make a choice about it. If you're making choices, then it's a misunderstanding. I mean, then you're doing it out of hope and fear. You don't hope. Well, I hope it's a word, or I fear if I don't do this. So that's why I say the best thing to do is don't do anything. But don't take your eyes off from it. Don't stop receiving what's happening. But don't come to a conclusion about it. What's the word? Prematurely, or that would work. Just wait until you have to do it. And you could say, or anybody could say, well, if I wait too long, the coyote is going to run off the cliff. I need to stop the coyote from doing that.
I'm confused in how you can see anything without coming to a conclusion.
So it's not about, when I say don't come to a conclusion, I know you can't help it. I can't help it. I come to conclusions all the time. So by saying don't come to conclusions, what happens to the awareness? You just start noticing, witnessing how much you keep concluding. And if you just watch that, then the energy that activity of concluding gets, it starts to show up. It's like watching an engine run and internal combustion engine, a gasoline engine, watching it run, and how does that work? And then at some point you actually see the fuel line and you think, well, I could stop that. Clip. I mean, it would be that precise and simple, but I mean, that's a metaphor. It's not a very good one, but if it has value, it's because it's so simple. And if it has a weakness, it's because it really doesn't fit that kind of a situation. It's not that hard edge phenomena that's arising. It's much more complicated. but that comes out of confidence. And that confidence is not based on success and failure. It's based on insight. And the insight that is there is not everything is dependently arisen. Nothing comes from its own side as an individual thing, entity, self. Everything has the example I use, a metaphor I use. You might look at the mouth of the Amazon and see one big flowing body of water. Where did that come from? Tell me the source. I mean, their sources are all the tributaries way up into the mountains in South America, right on through all of the forests that were burning down there. So it's one thing, and yet it's many things. The equality of sameness and difference. Go ahead.
Well, I've been looking at this motor for 20 years, and then all of a sudden it's a dragon.
Stop adding. Don't stop adding. I've been looking at this for 20 years.
Well, how do you see something that never stops?
That's how you see it. But you concluded that it never stops.
How is that a conclusion?
Looking for success. Success and failure, it's all the polarities. It's not that we don't see the polarities, but remember that anytime you have one thing, if you have any kind of idea, thought, a conclusion about anything, you're going to have its opposite. And you can't have this without its opposite. Just like the simple one, good and evil. We get the meaning of good from evil. So ultimate good does not have an opposite. Just like even in the relative world, just like the parking lot and infinite space, or you could say a black void and a ball of fire in the middle of nowhere. It's polarized, but you can't pick one over the other. So it's about seeing it. It'll pick itself. I mean, it's choiceless. I don't know how else to say it. That's a difficult concept to talk about without it being some mystical feeling where things are choiceless. It's probably very pragmatic and very dense in terms of it. It feels like something that's actually there. It doesn't have an opposite. More. I'm glad I was able to explain that.
I guess there's a tension in between those opposites. Okay. And I'm having a hard time seeing the space in between.
Just continue. So just continue to look at that.
Maybe this is just a semantical thing, but can you, if you have a conclusion but recognize it's a conclusion, is that in a way suspending the conclusion? If you kind of go, I know this is a conclusion, I really can't take it seriously as a concrete thing. I mean, even that turns into a conclusion about your conclusion. It's just a matter of.
I understand what you said. Now, ask me the question.
It's just a matter of
No,
backing
ask
up.
me the question.
Is it a matter of functionally? Is it a matter of just suspending your belief in your conclusions?
No. No, it is a matter of just before you conclude, then consciousness, just before it's filled up with concluding. So it's not so much about backing up, it's just the awareness needs to be all over the place. And it can't be all over the place if it's wrapped up in any kind of activity or non-activity or stopping something or starting something. Excuse me, then the conclusion, like when you said, I can't remember exactly how you said, well, I can see that I'm coming to a conclusion, but that kind of thing. That's actually covering up the situation and trying to validate something. So the idea there is that just be aware of the conclusion without any commentary, no elaboration on the conclusion. Just it feels kind of, well, to personalize, it feels kind of lonely. Like you don't feel like you're getting anywhere. There's kind of a sense of loss could start to arise. At the same time, the entire situation, which you might be talking about, is pretty open because there's no one there claiming any credit for anything. There's no one there manipulating or not manipulating. It's just an open dimension of being. It can feel very desolate. When I say desolate, I don't mean necessarily negative, but you can't find much going on there. So it's open. It's a little bit like what Wendy was talking about, her experience of being spaced out, except you're spaced out, but you see a lot of forms and shapes. You just don't know what they are. You don't know if they're good things or bad things. And it's not a problem. It's just an open dimension of being. If you know what you're doing or what you're not doing, in the relative sense, that seems to work okay. But if you're going beyond that into validating some things you're doing and devaluating other things, then we're caught in the labyrinth of Pan's labyrinth. We're caught in it's good and it's bad and it's scary and it's interesting and all the other feelings that can arise in that kind of a dynamic form.
What's the difference then between daydreaming and being spaced out?
Same thing. Daydreaming might be a different take on this being spaced out. You might have some content there, whereas spaced out, all the only content you have there is your concepts that are arising out of a feeling of being kind of lost in some kind of a bardo or intermediate state. Go ahead.
So if one is sitting on the sofa and one's mind wanders and one is daydreaming.
Would that be me sitting there, or you, or what?
Me sitting there and my mind is wandering.
Okay, good, got it, go ahead.
Is that meditating?
No. That's daydreaming. So I'll go further and say, what's the difference between this posture and sitting on the couch and thinking about shellfish? Shila. Exactly. Thank you. Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. What's the Shila part is you're deliberately, intentionally sitting down. You're taking that aspect of the mind, which is the body. Body's just an aspect of the mind. Who you are, this is temporary. Who you are can't be stopped, can't be started. Who you are doesn't come into existence, can't pass out of existence. It's called a spiritual path. Realize it. And you will be, to use a relative word, you'll be fearless. Nothing can take your understanding away because you never acquired it in the first place. You've always had it. So you're sitting on the couch like this, or you're sitting on the zafu like this. What's the difference? Shila. Shila, discipline. Sit down, put your body in a form and hold it in that position so that you can see more clearly all of the formless things that are happening in the consciousness of the mind and the memory, and just all the fog that comes and goes. Just like what Wendy was saying about her experience of being spaced out, that is meditation. It's not a goal, it's just an understanding, and it can show up that way. That may never come back again. And yet it may come back for 3 more weeks, or it may go away for a year, and then you might go through a whole session where there's a lot more of that happening because it is dependently, excuse me, it's dependently arisen until it's not. So it's causes and conditions. This, the weather, the timing, the day, the karma that you came into this world with, the karma of your parents, all the things that were just totally untraceable, the tributary streams like in the Amazon going off into the darkness. You cannot find the first cause for anything. And this is why praise and blame don't work. You can praise somebody for being a great, the most famous librarian in the world. There is someone probably somewhere, or someone that just can't even read. But causes and conditions are behind that. So right and wrong, success and failure and all of that, it's just an elaboration based on wanting something and gaining idea, wanting to get more and more and more. You're not wrong, just not very comfortable. Questions? Go on.
When we were talking about the difference between awareness and consciousness, you said that awareness is a form of ignorance.
And if I said that, but I said, if you're aware of this, you're ignoring everything else. You can't help but ignore. That's no more. Go ahead.
So even given that, with awareness, there's ignorance. And we're talking about obeying precepts or rules, but what about the conventional rules of just everyday situations? And there's awareness of the situation. How can we respond, or how can there be response? I don't know how to ask it.
Well, as far as you're going, I'm following you. So if you have just a question about it, I'll endeavor to respond. I don't know if I can answer it.
Anytime there's awareness of the situation, and we're still involved in this relative mechanical situation of conventional truth, how can we work with it without obeying the rules of conventional truth?
Well, you should. I mean, if you don't run red lights, don't do that. That's conventional. In the way that you could look and say there's a red light, but there's nothing coming, and I can go through. There might be times when you're in an emergency where you might need to do that. So relatively speaking, you might need to go through that conventional sense instead of saying no. I'm going through. It's a red light, while the person that you're trying to get to the hospital is dying in the back seat. This is a simplistic idea, but it's like that. It has to be situational. If you're to actually function out of what's happening, it has to be situational. So therefore, from the point of view of who you are and your ability to succeed or do the right thing or get a credential out of it, sometimes that's what we're really looking for. We're looking at trying to be right, trying to be correct, and there is no right and wrong. Even that wouldn't be correct, or even go ahead.
So the red light example, it's not always right to stop, or right or wrong. Sometimes you wouldn't stop, but it's still kind of more of a concrete example. Red means stop most of the time. Green means go, but a lot of situations are so complex that there isn't that. Generally, you do this.
I follow you. So what's the question?
So how do you work without in an unseen way, following the rules versus responding?
I can tell you. I can say, based on my understanding, don't do anything unless you have to. It's called patience. Or anything unless you have to. If you're doing something that you don't have to do, you can look and see what's the intention behind doing this that I don't have to do. It could be habit. Could it be somebody else's expectation? I should be doing this because I'm tied into what they think of me. Don't do anything else. And that includes opening your mouth. That includes anything, even meditating. Don't meditate unless you have to. Why would you do that? What's in it for you? You have to be very pragmatic about it. We're all here because of dissatisfaction with what's happening in our everyday situation. That could change. Things could start working out, and you could totally ignore this. Or go ahead, Rishi.
What if you think you are doing something and you're not sure why you're doing it? What should you do?
Well, there again, it's situational. Mm-hmm. If it's something you've been doing for a long time, then you might want to just continue to train your mind. If there's already the momentum of doing that, don't do anything unless you have to. In other words, don't stop doing that. So it's a stopping and starting sometimes gets confused. We go the other way because we want the credential. We want to be right. We want to come to some kind of conclusion and feel better. You may have to actually live your life as it's showing. However your life is showing up right now is appropriate. Your karma is, don't miss your life. Just be whoever you are and train your mind to see more clearly. The very best thing you can do is to train your mind, sit down, hold still, watch the confusion. The Buddha did not awaken to, as I say sometimes, butterflies and lily pads. Do I usually say that? The Buddha did not awaken to that wonderful God realm or heaven realm. The Buddha awoken to intense suffering and horror. And he saw it totally and completely and saw that it was unreal. And that was his realization. Everything is dependent, all this is dependently arisen, and parts of this think that there's separations in beings. And when he saw that, he became, or saw that he was the awakened one. And everyone he saw every being that he also saw was not separate from the Buddha. They were also awake, but they have it covered up based on fear. They don't want to. And so that's when the path started for teaching people. Excuse me. That was confusing to me too. She's trying to steal her glasses.
I see that there's questions on here.
Oh, okay. You can go ahead and talk those.
Greg B says, hi, if you're taking questions online, please, what is the benefit of preparing for death and not just crossing that bridge when it comes? Thank you.
So the death, the body mind going, the whole sensorium, everything going back into the elements of earth, water, fire, air, and space. That's going to happen. Nobody's gotten out of that yet that we know of. So you could just do that. Go ahead, do whatever you want to do. Don't do anything else you have to. But if this is a consideration for you, this may be a lifetime. And I'm not saying you've had other ones, but probably. But this may be a lifetime where you might want to do this differently. You might want to not just be on default and go into that and take all the unexamined karma that's been created lifetime after lifetime, day after day, month after month, year after year. Just in this lifetime, look at all the karma we've created by fighting with this and agreeing with that. It's not just the fighting, it's the agreeing too. So examine that, see what that is, so that when this body mind does collapse and go down, you have found, before that happens, you found out who you are, who you actually are. You find out your actual identity, which is not a self. And when you find out who that is, not threatened. It's not that you're going to go die, but you go, whatever's happening, you work with that. So, but there's no threat. And there's so much of no threat that you're not really concerned about what happens after death. If you continue, fine. If you don't continue, fine. Not concerned for that. And that's because you need a cause, is because you've understood you're just not separate. You're not separate from anything. It's coming and going, not separate. It's an illusion that there are separate beings, and it's quite funny to see that. See people's grasping and fighting and actually are willing to just totally, if somebody gets into a charismatic, powerful situation, they're willing to actually torture and kill and murder and cause pain to other people just to be happy, because power gives them happiness, but it doesn't last. But they're not open for any information, and the causes and conditions that arise as that particular dictator or oligarch or whatever, it's not their fault. All dharmas are without blame. But nobody's to blame. It's not that we shouldn't do something about it. Maybe we should, but we need to really appreciate everything that's happening in order to really understand it fundamentally. All this started eons ago. We've been having, what's the war I always talk about? The Peloponnesian War. You want to go back and try to stop that war? That might be a better place to start. But then there's all the wars before then, and all the chaos and all the passion, grasping, aggression, destroying, and ignorance shutting down. Find that within yourself, and don't add to it. Don't subtract from it. Don't ignore it. And it can't, within this particular amazing situation we call human consciousness, whatever kind of consciousness it is, that runs out of steam as a self. Yes, goes on.
Sometimes you say, well, you said it here, don't come to conclusions, and you talk about awareness of conclusions. And then you said, you said to ask yourself, what is the question? What is your intention?
Yes.
So are we looking for an answer?
That felt pretty good. We may be, but whatever comes up, maybe nothing will come up. Maybe something will come up. It's always about awareness. It's when we add on that makes things like if we're looking for an answer and nothing comes up, then there's some disappointment. That's adding. And then there's a commentary on the disappointment. That's more adding. So eventually we've got 3 different elaborations on top of the very thing that was available to be included or be aware of. But we've backed away from it by all of our ideas and examinations. That's why the sitting practice of meditation is so powerful, because it's always taking you back to what Trungpa Rinpoche calls square one, or right back to the one that I've used, which doesn't work anymore because we so seldom have to do this, is Control-Alt-Delete. Just back to square one. Return to the Buddha, return to the Dharma, return to the Sangha. This is the vow. You don't have to do that officially, but you might want to reflect on the teacher, what is being taught, and the community. Those are important aspects that work in different ways depending on what kind of stress or struggle, difficulty you're having with your practice or your mind, especially relative to the society we're in. This is why I don't teach in a conventional way. The traditional, what taught by Tibetan tantric practices, I've done them. They're very complicated, but I think the conclusion that I've come to, which I didn't conclude it just concluded, is you need to train your mind by watching the mind, not filling the mind full of other stuff. If you need to do that, then we can do that also, but I do that individually with people, not just as a blanket teaching the way the Tibetans do, or the way the Zen teachers do, or any teacher does. So it's very individual. But nothing was concluded, it's just that's the way it is. So there's no conclusion happening. Pardon all my nose blowing. Yes.
2 questions have come in from the monastery in Battle Creek. The first one from Juzan. What is being tired of negative thoughts?
What is being tired of negative thoughts? Just consciousness that's wrapped up in itself, that wants something else. Just the imputation that there's somebody who doesn't want that and thinks there's some way around that or some way to stop that. Or there's lots of ways of abandoning negativity. It's to blame something, to blame yourself, the apparent self, the imputed self, or the imputed other, or rather than just understand it's just dependent origination. If they're arising, then they're arising because of causes and conditions. And the downside is may not feel very comfortable, just like bad weather doesn't feel comfortable. But it's none of your business. Even though you're experiencing it. Have you noticed that? Weather's none of your business. Even though you're out in the, you're complaining about your umbrella collapsing. You're not really blaming who you should be is the weather. Blame the weather. Darn weather. So that's just an area where the word I sometimes use, just include. You don't have to make a big deal out of it, but just allow. A lot changes in the negativity arising in your mind if you don't run off to what's causing it. Even if you can find a relative situation that caused it, probably didn't cause it. It just triggered it. It's your negativity. So if you have unexamined, I sometimes use unexamined negativity somewhere, you might go for months without knowing about that. And then somebody looks at you, does something, a little thing that's not much, but it triggers because of the resonance there. It triggers that negativity. And instead of you being aware that fear, whatever maybe is coming out of being triggered, is your fear, your negativity. When I say I mean your particular consciousness dynamic showing up in this body form. And it's just about observing that. Not easy to do. And it's impossible to do unless you have a lot of mind training that you've been practicing. So when that shows up, you practice giving everything your attention enough so that is something that you're actually able to do with this negativity that has been triggered by somebody else. That is not their fault, is not your fault. It's not even the negativity's fault. It's just causes and conditions. kind of an impersonal dynamic that's going on everywhere, that people want to keep making something of it. Yes, Rusheen.
Is there value in reliving that and communicating around that, or is it dependent on the situation? Sometimes just ignoring it.
Yeah. So less is better. Wouldn't do anything with it. It certainly wouldn't fuel it. Or if you're talking about anytime you're talking with anyone who has no awareness training at all, who's just living as if everything is solid and real and people are to blame and people get credit. If you're talking in that world, less is better. Just listen, put everything on receive, click, receive, because you are not going to be able to negotiate with this world. It's called samsara. It's called delusion. And this doesn't mean you have to avoid it or stay out of it altogether and go to a mountaintop like they did 1,000 years ago. Be a leaver of home, like we talked about earlier. But you can just be with whatever's happening and continue to train your mind. And just work with the negativity that shows up, work with the confusion, and the way be with somebody without fixing them or helping them or entering into their confusion too much, but without ignoring it also. Like I was saying earlier, just being with somebody. You don't have to have any bright ideas about anything. Wait for them to accuse you of not having bright ideas. You could wait a while. And they could say, so why don't you help me? You're just sitting there. Ever had that happen? And then you can just say, probably in all honesty, I don't know what to do. Sounds difficult. I mean, you could do that, and it might lighten everybody's load a little bit. Just not always know everything about everything, what's going on. Even though it's obvious this person is creating their own pile of crap by running in circle and beating on this, beating on that, and then you happen to show up and they start beating on you. I mean, maybe not physically, but intellectually or emotionally. If you hadn't done that, look what you just did. You've ever been there before? Look what you just said. It's a hype. Get off stage. I mean, you don't have to leave the theater, but get into the front row and relax. Get some popcorn. Come back down and watch your metaphor and the other person's metaphor argue on stage. Go ahead.
There's some difficulty around that and not engaging in that tied to compassion and saving all beings or something. So just be really clear about what you're engaging in, right?
Yeah, and also don't ignore the first 5 sense fields, because quite often, anytime there's any fear or hope, we start to suck up into the thinking process and validate and devalue everything that's happening and judge it. Nothing gets into our experience unless it's processed through the conceptual mind first. So we can think we know what it is, we're protected, we know who's right, who's wrong. It's just a mess. It is. But if you just include a couple of your senses as you're in this intense situation with someone, maybe receiving a lot of difficulty from someone, maybe some blaming or some complaining or life is terrible for me, you could stay in your sense fields. Don't forget gravity. It's not forgetting you, as you hear me say endlessly. And stay in your senses, how your clothes feel. Stay in a sense of color. Just register the color red without any addition so that you don't even know what to call it. Pointing at your coffee urn. Just register the color pink. What am I talking about now? Pink elephant. I just imagined one. So it's an open dimension. You can create anything you need. You can create, I can fill this place full of angels. No problem. Wait a minute. Stop it. Show off. Wait till you get arthritis. Okay. What's that? First time in 25 years. I like to brag. If you can fill it full of angels, you follow me? You can fill it full of devils. It's not your choice. That's choiceless. If you think you have a choice, you have a big misunderstanding and your karma is going to continue to spin. Am I condemning you to something? No, I'm probably wrong. So just all you have to do is be in whatever you're there, and if it feels successful, it's probably you're fooling yourself.
It's funny.
See any angels?
Oh, sanctuary.
Huh? Further questions? We're way past timing when things normally top going. Very good, thank you.
Thank you.